Ms. Smith, would you like to make an opening?
I would, thank you. Your Honor, is it okay if I just move this?
Oh, you can move it anywhere you want. There's a lot of stuff. There's cords and stuff, so
I'm sorry,
don't
Sean,
trip.
can you just help me? I'm gonna pull it just forward,
Watch this blue cord right
and
here.
I'm gonna keep it to the side because I don't need it.
Okay,
I just have a few notes on it.
sure, good.
What's wrong? Sorry, Judge, just trying to get
You're
this. Okay. Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
On my way to court today, I blasted Taylor Swift to warm up my voice and calm my nerves. And there was a line in one of her songs that summarized what this case is about. Band-Aids don't stop bullet holes. And that's what this case is about. It's about the prosecution attempting to put a Band-Aid on problems that can't be fixed with a Band-Aid. The prosecution has charged Jennifer Crumbley with involuntary manslaughter in an effort to make the community feel better, in an effort to make people feel like someone is being held responsible, in an effort to send a message to gun owners, and none of those problems will be solved by charging Jennifer Crumbley with involuntary manslaughter. It's the same effect as when your child comes to you with a boo-boo and you give them a Band-Aid that they put on that doesn't take away the pain and can't undo what's happened to them. And in this case, a Band-Aid will never bring back the lives that were lost by Hannah, Justin, Tate, and Madison Baldwin. And the evidence in this case is absolutely horrific. Much of the evidence is going to make you sick and disgusted and scare you, traumatize you, and quite frankly, there's no reason the evidence needs to be shown. Mrs. Crumbley, myself, everyone in this courtroom agrees that on November 30th, 2021, the worst possible thing happened when Ethan Crumbley used a gun and terrorized the Oxford High School. So as you are watching the evidence, I ask you to keep in mind that much of what the prosecution is going to show you is going to alarm you and disgust you and be horrifically sad and tragic. But that evidence is about about the shooter. And in this case, we have agreed to call Jennifer Crumbley's son the shooter because he is the shooter and he is the one, as you will see from the evidence, who was responsible for the tragedy that unfolded on November 30th of 2021. Prior to November 30th, Jennifer Crumbley was the mother to a 15-year-old son, and she did not have it on her radar in any way that there was any mental disturbance, that her son would ever take a gun into a school, that her son would ever shoot people. The evidence at trial is going to show you that Jennifer Crumbley did the best she could as a mother to a child who grew up into a teenager and had no way to know what was going to happen. Jennifer Crumbley raised a son that she took to soccer practice, basketball, bowling. She's the kind of mother who, when a mole on his back changed color, a 1 millimeter mole, she took him to urgent care. She's the kind of mother who's texting her husband, who is at home, working from home. Where is Ethan? Where is Ethan? Where is Ethan? At 3:14 in the afternoon, getting texts back saying, Ethan gets home at 3:16, what's your problem? And she keeps texting, where is he? Where is he? You will see that if anything, Jennifer Crumbley was a hypervigilant mother who cared more about her son than anything in the world. Jennifer Crumbley is not a perfect parent, and we don't claim that she is. But what the evidence is going to show in this case is that the prosecution has very selectively pulled out slivers of evidence from a forest of trees to try to convince you that there was something wrong with Ethan and Jennifer Crumbley, as his mom, should have known. And at the end of the day, these slivers of evidence that are going to be presented to you will have no context and no explanation, and the defense will agree that on their face, it looks bad. But like any of you who look back at text messages sent a year ago, they may look bad without context and explanation. And so we would ask that you reserve any judgment on these slivers of evidence until the defense presents evidence itself, and we will be presenting evidence in this case to show the context and what was truly happening on these days that the prosecution is going to try to make you believe something more was happening. By way of example, the prosecution has one day where they claim Ethan needed help and Jennifer Crumbley was out with her horse. James Crumbley was with her at the barn. They had just gotten a new horse. Ethan is 15 years old at home, claiming there's a demon in the house, there's something going on, and the prosecution is going to try to use this one little point in time to convince you that Jennifer Crumbley was somehow neglecting her son. Much of the evidence in this trial is also going to center around James Crumbley, who is not on trial in this case. He has a separate trial, as Mr. Keese told you. You're going to hear evidence that James Crumbley and Ethan Crumbley liked guns. They had 3 guns, 2 guns that were purchased earlier in 2021, and a gun that was purchased at a Black Friday sale the day after Thanksgiving in 2021. You are going to hear evidence that James and Ethan went to the shooting range often, that James was responsible for storing the guns, and to be quite frank, Jennifer Crumbley didn't know anything about guns. Jennifer Crumbley, you will hear evidence, she went to the shooting range one time with James and the shooter, and she went a second time after the gun was bought. She was attempting to find a way to spend time with her son, who had just lost a dog, his friend had moved away from him. She's trying to find a way to connect to him. But on that day, when Jennifer Crumbley went to the shooting range, you will hear evidence that she didn't even know where the gun was or how to put it in the car. She had her husband prepare the gun to take it to the range. He had hid the gun in the bedroom of their home. The gun had a cable lock, a trigger lock in place. James Crumbley had the key to the trigger lock that kept the gun secure. James Crumbley used the trigger lock key, took the cable lock off, put the gun in the back of Miss Crumbley's car. Mrs. Crumbley simply drove to the gun range. You will see video of their experience at the gun range, and you will see that the shooter is the one showing Mrs. Crumbley how to use the gun at the range. And when they're done at the range, the gun was placed back in the back seat of the car, not back seat, but the back of an SUV. And Jennifer Crumbley drove home, and not being responsible for storing the gun and not even knowing where the gun specifically was placed, Jennifer Crumbley left the gun locked in the trunk, the back part of her SUV. And James Crumbley was responsible for getting the gun out, putting the trigger lock back on, storing the gun, and Mrs. Crumbley had nothing to do with that part of what happened. Over the next couple of days, this is right after Thanksgiving, the family is picking out their Christmas tree, talking about Christmas presents. There was certainly some sadness in the shooter's life, but nothing that would have amounted to any reason to believe he's going to shoot people or commit a school shooting. You will hear testimony that on the day of the shooting, Jennifer Crumbley went to work. She is essentially the breadwinner at this time. Mr. Crumbley was in between jobs. He's about to get a job offer. Mrs. Crumbley is trying to keep the household finances up. She's at work, and she finds out through an email and text message that her son has drawn this alarming drawing the prosecution put on the screen. Jennifer freaks out when she sees the drawing. You will see the text messages that show she's urgently texting her husband, emergency, call me now, and she races out of work and goes to the school. Upon arriving at the school, she meets with Sean Hopkins, the school counselor. She meets with Nick Ejak, the school principal, and she meets with James Crumbley and the shooter. And they are all in a room together where the shooter explains why he has put together this drawing and what the drawing means. The family and the school talk about how a counselor would be a good idea for the shooter to get into some kind of counseling. The meeting is not nearly as severe as Mrs. Crumbley was initially expecting. Trained professionals at the school who evaluate children represent that the shooter is of no risk to anyone, and they allow him to stay in school. The testimony will show this is not a situation where Jennifer Crumbley refused to take her child from the school. She was provided the option of take him home or leave him here. The shooter struggled when they had online school during COVID. It caused him great anxiety to miss school, and he wanted to stay that day. The school was fine with it. Mrs. Crumbley did leave the school and left the shooter at the school, not knowing he was going to become the shooter within the next few hours. Jennifer Crumbley, the evidence is going to show you, returns to work, and suddenly there is news that there's an open shooter at Oxford. Jennifer Crumbley, it's not even on her radar that her son would be the one with the gun doing anything. Her immediate concern is that her son may be hurt. As she is driving to the school as fast as she can, she has conversations with her husband and becomes aware that the gun at their house is missing. And in Jennifer Crumbley's mind, and you will hear evidence of this, she believes that perhaps her son has done something stupid like taken the gun and shot it in the air or done something. She knows he's still alive and believes that it's going to be okay. Whatever's happened, they can cross that bridge. A little bit later, there's more conversations, and Mrs. Crumbley becomes concerned that the shooter is actually attempting suicide. And Jennifer Crumbley texts her son, "Ethan, don't do it." It still has not crossed her mind that he would ever shoot another person. Ultimately, Jennifer and James Crumbley are called to the substation, where they learn that their son has become a school shooter and has shot people, and that there are fatalities. Jennifer Crumbley will tell you she still could not believe that was true, and went into a complete state of shock and despair and stress, and not knowing realizing her life and everyone's life was going to change. And her initial comments are about how could her son have ruined so many lives that day. Jennifer Crumbley sees her son at the substation, and for the first time, when he looks at her, his eyes looked black, and it was a son she did not recognize. Jennifer Crumbley and James Crumbley go back to their house, where law enforcement execute a search warrant. Law enforcement takes their cell phones, which the Crumbleys handed over. The Crumbleys have to go and buy burner phones or track phones so they have something to use to be in touch. They begin to realize that there are death threats around their house. People are planning riots around their house, and they cannot be in their home. Jennifer Crumbley and James Crumbley drive to a hotel where they spend the night. They are trying to figure out what is happening, and all Jennifer can think about are the things she believes she can control, like keeping her job, keeping health insurance, figuring out money, figuring out lawyers, and trying to digest what has just absolutely tragically unfolded. In the days following the event, while the prosecution says the evidence will show Jennifer Crumbley is lying, Jennifer Crumbley is truthfully telling the world she had no idea, and finding out that she is about to be charged in this Band-Aid effort by the prosecution with involuntary manslaughter. Jennifer and James Crumbley go to the bank. They're advised by friends and family, and you will hear testimony that their money could all be taken out of their accounts, and they know they need money to be able to live and hire lawyers and figure out what to do. They withdraw all of the money from the bank account. The burner phones they're using, they can't get access to any of their accounts because of this two-part authentication you now have to do. So they go to the Metro PCS store, where they buy new telephones that they can actually use to access their social media, their accounts, their contacts, and they end up with multiple cell phones. After that, they work to find lawyers. They don't know what to do. They don't understand what they're being charged with. They're under the stress of knowing their son is gone, and life will never be the same, undoubtedly. And on Friday, December 3rd, the Crumbleys find out when a press conference is held that they are being charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. And at that point, they attempt to try to figure out what to do, where to stay, where to go, what to do. And they ultimately ask a friend if they can stay at his art studio until they know where to go and what to do. They make plans to turn themselves into the court on Saturday morning, because remember, this is late in the day Friday. Saturday morning at 8:30 when the court opens up and does weekend arraignments. And overnight, the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's department, the fugitive apprehension team, the U.S. Marshals have a statewide search claiming that James Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley are on the lam. They are running, they are fleeing, they are trying to avoid charges, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. They are at their friend's art studio. They are waiting for instructions, and they are waiting to turn themselves in first thing Saturday morning when arraignments take place at the court. James and Jennifer Crumbley are sleeping on a mattress in the middle of the night. When police locate them, you will hear evidence. They're not really hiding. They're standing outside their car, their vehicle, smoking cigarettes. They're standing outside their car, talking on the telephone. They're communicating with various people they know. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that they're fleeing. You will see body camera footage where when police come into the art studio to find them dead asleep on this mattress, they are cooperative, they are taken into custody, and they are arrested. The prosecution has grossly misconstrued facts in this case, and I ask that you wait to make any judgment until all of the evidence has been presented and you have seen every detail of it, including Jennifer Crumbley's testimony, and she is going to take the stand and tell you about her life with her son, about the day he became the shooter, and about the day he did something she could have never anticipated or fathomed or predicted. She will tell you that when she saw the materials in this case, she learned that her son had not been her son for months, that he had been manipulating her, that he had been hiding things from her, that he had been sending text messages, alarming text messages to other people. You will hear that the school never advised Mrs. Crumbley of problematic issues that if she had heard about, she would have jumped right on top of it. Despite the fact, the evidence will show that Mrs. Crumbley is on power schools, managing missing assignments by her son and his grades. The school never told her about times the shooter was trying to sleep in class, about a test he had failed, about the shooter called to the office. She was never informed. You will hear testimony. She was never informed that the shooter wrote an autobiographical get to know you poster where he says he feels terrible and his family's a mistake. The school never notified Mrs. Crumbley of this. You will hear testimony that the school never notified Mrs. Crumbley that the shooter was having a, quote, rough time when he spoke to the school counselor. You will hear testimony that the school notified Ms. Crumbley that previous work found in the shooter's files showed that he leaned a little bit toward the violent side. You will hear testimony that the school never told Mrs. Crumbley about an index card the shooter wrote in class that had odd responses with a drawing of a loaded magazine and a person holding it out. You will hear that Mrs. Crumbley was never told much of the information the school had. And so when the prosecution is urging you not to assign fault to anyone else, at the end of the day, we ask that you pay attention to the evidence that Mrs. Crumbley knew. And quite frankly, when you evaluate that evidence and know what she knew and what she didn't know, and learn the context behind the slivers of evidence this prosecution is presenting, you will see that this was absolutely not foreseeable. This was absolutely not expected. And I am going to ask that you find Jennifer Crumbley not guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Thank you, Miss